again. William started bad traditions. Morning, everybody. We're going to be studying Ruth today. We'll wait, give us another second or two. We've always got tardy people coming to class late. I'm going to start handing out sentences. Yeah, that'll work.
In Hebrew.
Coach Riley used to do 500. He'd hand out 500. I got myself in trouble one day, and he reached for that toothpick in his mouth to give me sentences, and I jumped up and I said, 500. He went, 1,000. I did not know. Yeah. I did not know we were playing auction. I should have done that. All right. Before we get going, I think Ray said he looked up the meaning of the names here in the Book of Ruth for us. Or did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
You want to go over those real quick? Or
I just put them in the order that they arrived. But the first one, of course, Naomi means pleasant.
okay, no, Naomi means pleasant.
And later she says, take my name to Mara, which means bitterness.
Mara means yep. I found that out.
Elgon Melech is my God is king.
Yep.
I've got my computer glasses instead of my reading glasses.
Oh, what was
Melech is my God is king?
El, Emek, or I is king?
Melech. Eli is my God.
Elimelech.
Yeah, Elimelech.
Yeah,
My God is
I was
king.
thinking of the wrong. Okay.
Yah is king, whatever.
Yeah, Elimelech. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Then my whole life, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, means sickly.
Oh yeah,
Chilion means wasting, like wasting away.
yep, the two sons.
Boaz, in him there is strength. And then Obed, his son, was one who serves.
Did you happen to look up Ruth?
I thought I mentioned Ruth means friend.
Yeah, it's a word
I
play.
just forgot to tell you.
Yeah, there's a word play there, friend. I don't think it actually means friend. From the notes I got, it's that the word that we have in Hebrew sounds like the Hebrew word for friend. From what I understood, it was a word play thing. So how many of y'all got your study Bibles out and read the introduction to the Book of Ruth? Did anybody do that? I love doing these things. Book of Ruth is set in the time of the Judges. And apparently during one of those short periods of peace, because they go to Moab. And y'all got to remember, Moab is not exactly friendly to the Israelites. All right. This is where Balaam it was the king of Moab wanted Balaam to curse the Israelites. So there's a lot of, where does Moab come from? Anybody remember? Where's that lineage come from? First son of the eldest daughter of Lot.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Which makes him an incestuous ancestor. He's a product of incest. So, and then the Amorites are the same thing, but that means that they are related, fairly closely related to the Hebrews, because Lot and Abram are kinsmen. So the author is unknown. The tradition is that Samuel wrote it, but there's a lot of reasons apparently for the people who study these things that say that probably not Samuel. But they do say that the literary style suggests sometime during the reign of the kings, during the Davidic period. And it focuses on Ruth's devotion to Naomi and Boaz and their kindness, Boaz's kindness to both women. But I did not realize in a Hebrew mindset, at least according to the notes I had in my study Bible, and when I started thinking about it, I see it. Who is the primary character in the Book of Ruth? Who's the book actually really about? Naomi. It's very likely that this is, I don't know if this actually happened or not. Naomi is what happens to her in this story mirrors Israel, the life of the nation of Israel. She goes somewhere else to save her life because of a famine. She becomes destitute there. She's totally without any hope. So she goes back to the land of promise, hoping to change her fortunes without, there's nothing. She's just done. She's barren. She has no sons. Her lineage is going to be cut off. And then she's restored because of the kindness of Yahweh through Boaz and Ruth. I didn't see that until I started looking with my spiritual cultural eyes. And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's there. It's in the story. And it's also, it covers about how this is a very, very structured book. It's striking all the more because the author, Ruth is a Moabite, and it demonstrates that citizenship in the kingdom of Yahweh has nothing to do with blood by birth, like some of the rabbis are going to think at later times. But it's by living according to Yahweh's commands. It's obedient faith. And it offers a look at the role of redemption in the Hebrew world in the ancient Near East. It mentions, my study introductory to the Bible to the book told me that the Hebrew word in its different forms, and I've learned that many forms for the same word, the way the Hebrew root system works. But the word of redemption is mentioned 23 times in the Book of Ruth. And it shows that Naomi moves from, having a husband and all, moving somewhere where she could find food and they escape the famine, into total despair. From there to happiness as a result of Ruth and Boaz's actions. So it's from destruction to security and hope. And it mirrors the life of Israel in Yahweh and of the individual believer in the Messiah. It points out that when her husband dies and then her two sons die, the lineage of her husband's family is going to end there. And she's too old to remarry. What does she? What's that got to do with anything? Well, she's barren. Which probably means that there's no more children left in her womb. So she's probably past the age of being able to have children, which is what she means. Nobody's going to want to marry her. So, and her daughters have no hope of being married by any more of her sons or anything. So, in their worldview, end of the line. So she runs back. I saw a little bit of prodigal son here. She went off into the other countries and just totally ruined. So she goes back home. So that's part of what's being set up there. And then the literary style is something that I would not see unless I was.
Needs milk. Need help?
I think I got it.
Right. But the comments they made about the literary style are things that some of it I can pick out my own, but I need help with other parts of it because I'm just still starting to really learn to study the scriptures the way the ancients would have. But it's a short book, it's compact, and it is very rich and dramatic, especially from their perspective. And oh my gosh, do you have to know the Hebrew culture to understand all the nuance in the Book of Ruth? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if any of y'all remember, but many years ago, Hollywood made a movie about Ruth. And in the beginning of the movie, she was supposed to be offered to Moloch. Is it Moloch? Is that the correct?
Moloch, either way.
As a virgin offering and as a young child, but she had a blemish. And because of that, they did not do it. Picked another one, and she was saved from that. Is there anything to that, or was that totally Hollywood?
Unless that comes from the rabbinic traditions,
That's
Hollywood.
That's what I was wondering, because usually there's a little bit of truth that runs through.
It might be the
those
rabbinic
things.
traditions. Now, I know that we didn't go see the new movie about Noah with
I did.
Russell Crowe, because I heard about the burning stone giants and everything.
Yeah, it was much.
There's truth to that story.
It was Hollywood, but
No.
I know.
The burning stone giants comes from Enoch.
I know
But what it is they read it literally.
Yeah.
It was actually in Enoch, if you understand the prophetic language, the giants made of burning stones, that's a reference to angels.
Right. But I was just wondering if there was anything.
For Ruth, not that I've heard, ever. No, I've never run across that anywhere.
Do y'all remember that movie? Or am I the only one?
I don't recall that
Are we the only ones old enough to remember that? That's terrible.
But now, if Hollywood added that, given the fact that the lineage of the Messiah starts with Ruth, I can see that though, in a way.
It was the Florida Theater, I think.
That was a drive.
No, the Florida was right
They
down.
launched a rabbit in the little classroom. But no, ma'am, I've never heard anything about that one. I do know that I was reading through this, and even my study Bible picked out that it's very there's a symmetry in the Book of Ruth. It's got a chiasmic structure to it. The turning point on the whole story is exactly in the middle of the book. And like I said, it is rich in the cultural.
And it's, like you said, it's a representation of Israel.
I think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do think so. Which means that it's either loosely based on a story that was retained in the oral traditions, or this is one of these, it's like a story that's made up to teach a bigger message. And sometimes some of the parables that Yeshua gives us, you have to wonder whether or not, there was a certain man, whatever. It may not be. It just might be a story
And then
meant to teach a message.
It goes on into where Naomi actually tells her what to do, because she doesn't know she's from someplace else, but her mother-in-law did, and that's how she approached Boaz, and the rest is in the story.
Well, it's also striking though that so Naomi loses her husband, but she still has a little bit of hope because she has two sons that are married. So there's hope to continue the line because so she has her sons, but they marry Moabite women. Now it's not forbidden to marry the Moabite women, but by marrying the Moabite women, you've got 10 generations before her descendants re-enter the assembly. Because the Moabite, an offspring from a Moabite wedding or marriage, cannot enter the assembly of Yahweh for 10 generations. So when her sons finally die, she is totally, the way the ancients, especially the ancient Hebrews would have seen this, she's totally desolate.
Yeah.
Children, this is one of the things that we don't recognize anymore in our world. And I have read this both in scripture studies and people who don't really care about the Bible, but they just study the ancient Egyptologists and all, the folks who just study archaeology and the ancient cultures. The only culture in the ancient times that valued children were the Hebrews. Everybody else saw children as a burden because they were somebody else that had to be fed. And this is one of the reasons they didn't mind offering them up to the gods as much as they used to do. The only ones they valued was the firstborn son. And if the firstborn wasn't a son, if you were a firstborn daughter, you're in trouble. You're liable to find your wet self and being sacrificed somewhere. Or what the Romans would do is take the child to the city center and just leave them at the fountain, where most of the time the children, if somebody didn't come grab them and make them a slave or something, they died from exposure. Well, this is where your tradition with the Roman Catholic Church comes from, where where you put the baby in the turnstile and you turn the thing, and the ministry, whatever it was, the monks or the sisters would take the child and raise them. That's where this comes from, is that they would, as time went on, the Christian church would build little churches as close to the fountain, the center of town, as they could. So if you were of a decent mind, instead of leaving your baby just by the fountain, you'd put them in this little turnstile and turn it and ring the bell. And then the sisters or the brothers and all would raise the child.
Oh.
So
like the ones they have nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I was able to confirm that.
They can do
So
They do.
to the police station,
Yep.
or the fire
Yep.
station, or any of those.
but as you return to a culture that does not value your children, that is a clear sign that child sacrifice is returned. That's a sign of growing paganism. It's one of the strongest signs that you're living in a pagan society is disregard for the children. By the way, in Daniel, everybody's looking for the prince who is to come. Well, he's going to be gay because he has no concern for the focus of women or the concern of women. If you're a Hebrew woman, one of the biggest concerns in your life is to have children. So where we're thinking you're looking for a gay man, you might very well be, first of all, the prince who is to come is a spiritual being. You're looking for a spiritual being that's not going to care about the children. somebody somewhere in the spiritual world has grasp on this country right now because he don't give a rat's rip about our children.
Well, you know, Sarah, that's the reason Sarah tried to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was, Rachel tried to fix it. And, yeah.
That was a big.
But these are the types of things I'm learning to start looking for in our scriptures. Because it's a recent thing for me too. I mean, I've learned a lot, but now I'm learning to start looking at them the way the original audience would have looked at them.
We're supposed to be fertile.
So Naomi decides she's going to return to her homeland, which is the land of promise. And she urges her daughter-in-laws to go back to their house. And here's one of the cultural things. They both tell her, no, I'm going to stay with you. Well, the one daughter-in-law probably always wanted to go back to her parents' house, but she's obligated to say, nope, I'm going to stay with you, mom-in-law. So Naomi tells her a second time, and now she's like, okay, I'm gone. Skedaddle. She met her honor. You know, honor's a big deal to them, so she met the requirement. She kept faith. But then when Naomi told her to go home the second time, which was what Naomi's required to do, she took it and took it off and went home. And then Ruth is the one who stayed faithful to Naomi.
Forgot to mention Oprah's speaking of her name, but it's back of the neck. What did you see as she's walking away?
Back of the neck. So what happens here is she sends them, but Ruth decides she's going to stay with her. And Ruth says that, your people will become my people, and your El or your God will become my God. That's a big deal in the ancient times.
You're
you're the big culture shock. She is. So in this case, Ruth crosses over. She becomes a Hebrew.
Yeah.
She crosses over right there. So they go home, Naomi, and they're in the outskirts of Bethlehem, if I'm not mistaken. They say, and you're going to, depending on the translation you're reading, you're going to run into some really awkward Hebrew thinking in here. Because it says, oh man, my glasses are killing me today.
Where exactly were the Yehudim at that time?
Well, they were living in the land. It says, the name of the man is Elimelech, and the name of the wife, Naomi, and the names of the two sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem.
Okay.
So when I first read that several times, it wasn't until I read the notes that I understood what was going on here. For us, I've got a comma there between Chilion and Ephrathites. There should be a colon there, or a semicolon, because it's telling us that Ephrathites, in other words, they're living from this area around Bethlehem. So there were several passages in the Book of Ruth I found that they don't read naturally to a native English speaker, no matter how well we translate them. They're just awkward sentence structure for us. But it's telling us where they come from. Well, Bethlehem. This is, Naomi returns there. This is where the lineage of the Messiah starts. This is where the lineage of David and Jesse starts. This is where the anchor to Bethlehem comes from. So this is a fulfillment of a prophecy. And what I realized is that most of the prophets are going to write after this period in the Judges. So they're reaching back to something that's already started and telling you that the Messiah will come from Bethlehem, because that's in the prophets. So that work, when it's prophesied, has already started. And it just struck me of how Yahweh works on everything. He's upstream and downstream all at the same time. You're here in the now, but he's working back there and up there. And
the very first was they buried Rachel there, which was the daughter of who?
Oh God, I should know that.
Which was Abraham's what?
Abraham's kin.
Yeah.
Is it Laban?
Close.
Laban.
Yeah.
Laban, yes.
That's the reason Rebecca sent her there. Was because she wanted him not to marry like his brother did.
So this is where we return. She returns, and this is where she switches her name over to Mara. And she returns at what time of year?
Time of harvest.
It's time of harvest.
Yeah.
She comes back at the time of booth. What is that going to mirror? If if, like a lot of people do, I know people argue whether or not the Messiah was born in the spring feast or the fall feast. And like Rick was saying, I think it's the fall feast because of John's birth. That's the timing for us.
That's
there.
right.
Yes.
Yes.
And
That's
I like it
true.
also because it's prophetic. The Messiah would come to be born to be with us at the time that Yahweh comes to live with us, which is what the fall feast. Well, she's coming home to live back with Yahweh again
Well, if
at
you
the fall
think
feast,
about
and it's
it,
going to mirror
it
when they come to
makes-
Bethlehem when the Messiah is born.
Think of all the things that went on, like they were counting. Well, if you were a government and you decided that you wanted to do this, you wanted a census, when would you do it?
Yeah, but that's another thing. That census took place all year long. I've looked into that. I went to the outside
think
the
so?
scriptures.
You think
No,
that-
I know. I went outside the
It took the
scriptures.
whole year to do it.
You had a year to be recorded. I went outside the scriptures to look at how because I ran into some teachings.
They only give us 3 months.
I know, but I ran into some teachings about the Roman census because there's a big argument of how many they had, in the 10 years leading up to the birth of the Messiah. The scriptures suggest one. External evidence suggests there were several, like as many as
At least
6,
three.
depending on how you're counting. So I wanted to know how the heck did the Romans do this, and I went and I researched the Roman practices.
Side of it.
They would give you a year, okay, because they recognized how the people lived at the time. They would give you up to a year, and we were talking about this before class.
'Cause,
So
We
it's-
have to do
it's-
one every year.
Mhm.
In the business, you have to send in all of the information, and they only give you 3 months to do it.
Yeah.
And
But-
it's pretty extensive.
It's just what it does is it makes it interesting that Joseph chose to go to Bethlehem during the fall harvests. He might have been okay. Well, I got to go get the census, and we got to go to Jerusalem at this time, so we might as well just get it all done at once. He might have been a economy of trips. So I don't know, but I just found it really interesting
Yeah, it just-
that Naomi returns at this point, which also makes provision for 2 very poor women that have absolutely nothing to survive because they're coming back in a time when it would have been easy to glean. Okay, the law would have, they could have gleaned anywhere.
Are you saying that Naomi returned during the fall feast?
That's what the scriptures say.
It says the
Fall harvest.
of the barley. When was barley harvested?
Is this
In the
barley?
spring.
Oh, it does.
Well,
Well, they're
I
harvesting
thought it was
barley,
wheat.
but the scriptures said fall feasts.
I thought it was,
I thought the scripture said it was from the fall feast.
I don't recall.
I do know they're having the barley, but
But barley was a spring crop.
yes, typically, but you can raise barley all year long if you want to. So I don't know. I thought the scripture
Yeah.
said it was the fall.
They could have returned in the fall, and the time period.
That's
between
true.
there and
That's
the
true
time
too.
She laid on the threshing floor. with
Yes,
Boaz.
that's entirely true. We've got to remember that they don't care about the timelines that much. She could have returned to the fall, and then this story starts up again in the spring feast. It could.
You look at that.
Yeah.
Possible.
I have no idea. I just find it. But even if that was the case, the fact that she returns during.
It does say in verse 17 of chapter 2 that it was barley.
Oh, I know they're harvesting barley. I know that.
Beneath barley. Yeah.
But I could have swore earlier on it's.
And like you say,
you know,
barley can be
yes.
done throughout. It's a very quick crop.
Yes.
The first
Well, that's the
harvest
reason I don't
of
like that
barley is in
jumping
the
in Israel.
spring.
Would they
but-
say they've got barley at the spring of the year?
Yeah.
See, everybody kept, the ones that kept early feast this year, kept it this last month
Right.
in the summertime.
Y'all
What
do
does the
understand
word
also
say?
what's the primary crop that you use to feed your livestock with?
Barley.
In that part of the world, yes, barley. So you have to grow it all year long if you can. So I don't know. I could have swore, because I made a note as I was reading it. I could have swore it was the fall feast when she returned. But either way, there's parallels going on here, and that's the big point to me. And then Ruth is gleaning in the field, and Boaz sees her. And he goes and he greets his servants, his workers. And the notes in my book, my Bible told me, that's in culturally the way he greets the leader of his servants. That's very indicative of a pious man, because it wasn't just come up, tell the people, start bossing people around and demanding. He greets them friendly and in a what would be indicative of a
They're part of
believer.
his wealth.
Yes, they are. So he's treating them kindly to begin with. And that's just where he sees Naomi and he asks the head of his servants, his manager there, who she is and what's going on. And does anybody realize that Boaz not only tells his servants to allow her to glean, he gives them commands that go far in excess of the requirements of the law, far in excess. And I noticed that he makes the comment to her that he told the servants to leave her alone, not to mess with her. And then Naomi tells her to make sure that she stays with Boaz's maids so that nobody will lay hands on her. I could have swore that if you're going to go and lay hands on a woman back in their day and age, that would get you stoned to death. So culturally, I'm noticing, because that would constitute, I would thought that would constitute, a form of either rape or adultery. But there's a cultural hint here, though, that if you're an unaccounted for female working in the fields this time of year,
You might be at risk.
yeah, how would we put that gently? It might be taken that you're advertising.
Well, and also, if you look at what Naomi told Ruth to do at the threshing floor, that indicates that there were other traditions or whatever that may not be the ones we'd like to discuss here.
Something happened in the churches.
There are kids present.
The women were out in the field.
Yes, the women were out in the field, and you could choose your wives from then. There is a parallel in here. Remember, Perez is mentioned later in this book when Ruth is blessed, and they mention Perez, Tamar's child, one of Tamar's twins. Y'all, do you remember the story of Judah and Tamar? Do you remember why Judah is there to see her? What's he doing? It's shearing season. I had to go research this one time. It was a practice, a cultural tradition that after the end of the shearing of the sheep, the men would tend to get a little drunk, have a party, because it's a lot of hard work. And a lot of times this is where the women of ill repute would show up to profit from the fact that a lot of the workers have just been paid. So this is what Judah was doing with Tamar, is he's celebrating, and he thought he saw somebody on the side of the road there and didn't realize who she was. So there is a slight parallel allusion going on here with this too. And it brought that to mind for me. Like I said, this is a culturally rich book. You will miss a lot of the nuance in this book if you don't have some knowledge of how they lived in the ancient times. So here's where we were. So Ruth goes back, reports to Naomi, and then Naomi tells Ruth what to do. And essentially he tells her, get yourself all gussied up, cleaned up, washed up, make yourself smell good, dress good, look good, and then go back to the threshing floor. Now, a lot of people have read this and they think, Naomi's doing that fancy don't let me down thing. Mom's dressing her up to look like a tart to send her out there to find herself a man. That is what Naomi is doing, but not culturally in an immoral way, because Boaz is a kinsman, and Boaz can redeem Ruth if he chooses to do so. And what Naomi is telling Ruth to do is essentially go appeal to Boaz for marriage. She's going to ask him to marry. And then she says, but it's not necessarily without scandal. We read this story about Ruth laying at Boaz's feet. Y'all do understand that feet is a Hebrew euphemism for genitalia. I've wondered about this. She may have laid at his feet. This doesn't strike as necessarily, and if that's what she did, then the word feet, it's an intentional wordplay here to appeal to that part of Boaz. But I have a sneaky suspicion that what she did is she went to him and what we would think of as spooned. She cuddled up next to him and bumped a certain part of his body with a certain part of hers, back to front. Yes, kids. But the reason I tell you this is, have you ever slept in an area where a bunch of men have been working and they have to sleep like cowboy style out in the wilderness or just piled up into a building somewhere, which is what they're doing. The workers are all sleeping. Have you ever done that? Have you ever have you ever been to a slumber party with a bunch of girls?
Oh, okay. Yes.
I've had to do this in the field with men before, and it is not unusual to have people at your feet bumping around. You pay them no mind. I do not think that Boaz would have noticed somebody sleeping at his feet. He'd either kick them to make room or he'd pulled his feet up. In the environment they're sleeping in, out in, pretty much either in a barn somewhere out under what we would call sleeping light in the military, under the stars, the only way you're going to actually get noticed is if you get a little too personal. So I do believe that there was nothing illicit going on here, but there was a strong implication. Because that's exactly how Boaz, she even tells him, cover me with your cloak, which is marry me. And he responds. He knew exactly what she was saying. So there's clear cultural things going on here that, at the very least, have nothing to, it's not just his little foot stompers.
Culturally, she was proposing marriage.
Yes. Well, she was asking him to do it.
Right. That's what I mean.
In verse 14 of chapter 3, it says she got up early before.
Yes.
It implies that he left before anything could happen.
Yes, and she does that because he doesn't want her to be seen.
Right.
Because they would be solicitous.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's not supposed to be any women
There would
around
be
the
talk.
men. There would be talk, yeah. But now Boaz, and then she goes home and Naomi tells her, he's not going to rest until he takes care of this. And here's another one so he goes to the gate and he says there's another kinsman
It's closer. Yeah.
So the right lies with him. The right of redemption lies with this other kinsman. This other kinsman's like, heck with it. Don't want the responsibility. So he takes off his sandal and he hands it to Boaz. This is a visible physical sign of passing the right of inheritance to Boaz. Now, y'all do realize that there's two things going on here. That man lost some face. He had a duty to redeem his kinsman.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
So he's not going to be as in high of esteem in the community anymore because he shirked his responsibility. He gave it to Boaz, and Boaz immediately does his job. And it struck me. Marriage was more of a function of society in the old times than anything we do today.
Well, it has always amazed me that that culture is a lot like that culture in the East. And that's the reason I'm almost positive those 6 sons of Keturah are mixed up in that culture, because they took Abraham's culture with them when they went to the East. Mm-hmm. And it's really close.
Mm-hmm. But now there's Boaz. Yes.
Another thing a lot of people don't realize is going to the city gate was like going to court.
Yeah, that's a courtroom. That's the courtroom.
Today's viewpoint, because you were before the elders.
That's where the stoning was done.
And that's. So
and
this was a legal proceeding.
Yes, this was a legal proceeding. And if you weren't recognized as a city elder, you might be there to witness, but you better keep your mouth shut.
Oh, yeah.
Because you ain't got no standing there. Unless you're called to talk, you sit and watch and listen and don't do anything else.
And the passing of the sandal was like signing a contract.
That's exactly what that was. And he probably got his sandal back.
Yeah, that's just a.
Now, Boaz says something in this engagement. He says why he's going to do this. He wants to redeem her so that, he might not have, so that Naomi's husband's line would be continued. He's getting married to serve a function within society. So that was much more important than whether or not this is an indication that biblical love is something that you choose to do and grow into. Because love your wife. Well, I got married because mom and dad said I had to marry her or him. Bible didn't care. Learn to love each other and don't go running around with somebody else.
Love is a commitment to start with.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the Bible, love is a person. It's a decision and commitment put into action.
Also, I know it's interesting that law of continuing line, when it was initially given, it was to the next brother.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, obviously, Boaz and this other gentleman that wasn't named, they weren't brothers. They were related somehow, so apparently over time the Jews expanded that. That means other relatives could,
Yes.
if they were, within a certain range.
The tradition of redemption goes all throughout the Middle East, from Egypt all the way over to Mesopotamia up to southern Turkey. And that predates the law of Moses. So Moses might have just been making a specific mention to the Hebrews, but the law of redemption was already known. And it might be, I know this much from studying it, redemption goes from kin to kin. But I also found in some of my studies that all I have to do to redeem you, if we're not related by blood, is adopt you, and then either adopt you as a son or marry you into the family anyhow to redeem you. Like if you're sentenced or something, people can take your place in a sentence. And there was a big region-wide cultural set of laws that went with redemption. So that might be also part of what's in play here. Just because we read it in scripture, that does not mean that the culture of the region isn't also included in what's going on. I mean, the scripture doesn't dictate to you the land of living a nomadic herdsman. That's just included in that's the world that Abraham inherited and was born into. And it's just wrapped up in scripture. So there's a lot of traditions that were probably like that aren't specific to the Hebrews. I don't know. But I just know that I've done a lot of reading on redemption. You could even, like if you're an old man and your young son gets condemned to death, you can take his place in the ancient world under certain redemption laws. They did put you to death in place of your son, and your son gets to go free. Things like that could be done. It just didn't happen often. That's a love beyond what was required in their society, but it could be done.
Well, that's what was done.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure?
You should. So the next big thing I picked out here, Ruth has a son, and there's an interesting thing going on here. When Naomi, the son's laid in Naomi's lap, she's going to become the nurse to the, like the nanny to this son. The conversation that goes on there, and there's a big jump. I mean, you go from he's going to redeem Ruth to Ruth has a child. And that's because the next big step in this story, Naomi's totally restored. The language there suggests that Naomi may have adopted the son, much like Israel adopted Joseph's children. Which, it might be, might not be, but the notes I have, it mirrors the adoption practices there because of the way they're talking. And we're told, this is the start. Obed, it means servant, and he's going to be the head of the line that will eventually lead to Jesse and to David, and to the Messiah.
Absolutely.
And we've got, I think it's 4 women in the lineage of the Messiah, and 3 of them are Gentiles. I can't remember, is Tamar, is she Canaanite? Or is she I don't remember. Judah's son's wife. I don't remember. I'll have to look that up. But I know that the Gentile women that are, and then you have the prostitute that helps with the, is she the third one that's third Gentile listed? Rahab. Yeah. Rahab. I think she's the other one. All 3 of them are not friendly to the nation of Israel. They come from peoples that are not friendly, that choose to be friendly.
But we're probably Hebrew.
Crossed over. Yeah. The Hebrew, and the fact that they were aligned with Yahweh and his people. Yes. No doubt of that in my mind. Otherwise, I don't think they've been there. But that's the book of Ruth. Did anybody else run into anything with Ruth that caught their attention?
It's just a really beautiful story.
Yes, and that's what in the beginning of my study Bible, that's what they point out.
It is a book of love. If there's, there's a few in there that just, that's what they are, and that's what that is.
And it's multi-layered. Yeah. And I myself, this is one I want to return to later because it's going to give me guides for more things to study about the cultures. because
Precept.
I'm just in an area where I'm starting to learn from my personal studies. I'm learning that I got to study the culture more than I already have. I got a couple books still on my shelf that I have still yet to read that might help. But they're egghead, pointy head, thick, scholarly, dry books, and I just haven't felt like digging through them yet. I got other things on my mind, but I will get into them because some of the answers I've been hunting for have got to be there in the culture, and it's right in my scriptures. I'm just missing the connection. It's like there's certain things that you guys could talk about using fisherman's language that I wouldn't. I'd get a rough idea, but I wouldn't understand. These two could talk about electronics, and I'd be like, I think there's some of that going on here.
Well, we were talking this morning about, they would come in and they would have made a good trip and they would have a pocket full of money. And then that by the time that they got ready to go, which usually wasn't less than a week, that they would go back out, it was gone. They had absolutely nothing left, and they would come in to the fish house and have to get what we called a pinch off.
So they lived like sailors.
Absolutely.
And they have to go out fishing on borrowed money.
They had to borrow money to take care of the family while they were gone.
That's a lot like a farmer too. The farmer is always borrowing to raise the crop that's going to pay off the loan so he can make another loan to borrow. Yep. That's how a farmer gets rich, is they catch up on that and they have their own money to start the next crop. And most farmers never manage to do that.
Well, that's how we ended up with boats. We didn't want them. We wanted to manage them, but we
Yeah, I
didn't
heard
want
Brother Kenyon talk about that. They'd pay you off by giving you the boat.
And, well, they would get so deep, there was nothing else they could do.
And the boat is just break out another 1,000 to keep them up.
It would get him a divorce. There was only two things. 52 years, two things. That was to run for political office. And the other was to buy another commercial boat. Either one of them. The rest, I talked to him, we forgive that, but no. That's unforgivable.
Oh, that's
That
it.
puts you in the
That's
box.
Yeah, I can't run for political office either. They dig up my past.
Two happiest
Well,
days
the
of your
reason I
life. The
say
day you buy the boat and the day you sell it.
They tried for several years,
I could see that.
right after we married. It was continuous. And I told him, I said, well, you can, but not with me. You'll have to find you another, me. It's not going to be this one. And
Well,
I don't think I could have stood another boat.
We're going to start on 1 Samuel next Sabbath. And just a quick note, y'all do realize that 1st and 2nd Samuel originally was one book, and 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, they were all originally one book. We broke them up because too long for our simple minds to read in one passage, I guess.
Yeah.
I know that they were originally, we've split them up, but I'm going to start on 1 Samuel. And I guess we're going to be meeting King David soon and Saul. And we'll start with that. I know that the records of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, there's a lot more cultural richness going on there in these two books too. But there are going to be some patterns set here that will continue through the prophets and into the New Testament, especially the Gospels. So we'll want to pay a little attention when we're in these books. This is one of the ones that also mixes the lives of the prophets with the narrative that's going on.
Well, I call those history books.
That's what they are history to the our House of Judah calls them the history books. They call them the writings, but that's what they are. They're history books. And they lump Proverbs and Psalms in with the writings. Although a lot of Psalms, that book there is half in the writings and half in the prophets.
Yeah.
Most of it's in the spirit.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's just totally
with the prophets
spiritual.
and everything. So, we'll unless something else comes up, I'm sticking where I'm doing until we get all the way through Chronicles, because all I'm doing is sharing my own personal readings and studies with y'all. Because for whatever reason, that's where Yahweh has me now. I keep hearing "remember" in my head. Well, these are the least studied books for me in Scripture. So I figured it's not going to hurt us to spend a little time going through them, because we don't see them in our readings during services and all. So when we get done with those, I'm probably going to just jump right into the prophets. I read the prophets very differently than most believers I've encountered. So we'll see. That's the plan, but he always interrupts. It's okay. I'll be obedient to whatever he puts on me. Anything else for today? Ruth was short, sweet, and simple.
Beautiful.
Multi-layered. Economy of words. Dense, rich. All right. That's all I have for today. We'll see everybody at service. Good night, Caitlin.